If we could now move to the monthly budget report.
Good evening, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. The monthly budget report follows. I can attest that the Utah State Board of Education is able to meet all of its obligations, commitments that are known and within our systems of record. And if you look, if you recall, I introduced the new format to you, the board members and the public. You access it by the link. This member, so there's not an attachment anymore. You access the link, and it's interactive, so that you can choose rather than what was it before, 70 plus pages that you had to scroll down through. I just wanted to take this time, Madam Chair, to emphasize that we've provided a much better tool. We were called out in several audits as not being up to speed on dashboards, presentations. This is a much more user-friendly way for you as a board member of the public to go in and review the overall budget or any budget for any one of the sections within the USBE. Pending any questions with the monthly budget report or on any particular section, I'll move to the discretionary report at your direction, Madam Chair.
I see no questions. So.
Okay, discretionary report. So as the discretionary report is being pulled up, there was no actions taken recently, so this is an updated report. We try to provide both the report. If there's an update to the report, we show you the changes that are made. If you could pull open the discretionary funds report, I do want to just take a brief moment to, again, orient you and or board members and the public to the upper right-hand corner. Those are funds that are available in their particular funding sources, state, federal mineral lease, just as examples, that you as a board member can at any time, request for use where you see fit. We would always make sure, in the control environment we're in, that whatever you propose could be met or is an allowable expenditure from any one of those sources in the upper right-hand corner. In the main body of the report is the status of funds related to the projects that you have approved. To the right of the document is the dates. We really try to give you as much information as we can in such a concise manner, but we feel it's really important for you to, when you look at the project, is when the board approved it, or other evidence of why or that particular project is being pursued, always at your direction and when that occurred. So Madam Chair, subject to any questions or concerns with the discretionary fund report, I can move to the next presentation, which is a deeper dive at the board's request on the status of the CARES ARP funds, and I believe Dr. Lang is going to provide that to you.
And
so if you'll recognize him, and
I
absolutely we can provide that to you.
But before that, while he's coming on up and getting settled in, Chair Moss.
Thank you. In the category of things I should know by now, when would be the appropriate time to seek approval for a funding proposal out of the discretionary funds, and specifically the
So, Chair,
the mineral lease funds?
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, to answer Chair Moss's question, I would recommend that you do that to request to me so that I can get it on the Finance Committee agenda for their thing, and then they would bring it to the board. So, does that answer Chair Moss's question, Madam Chair?
It does. Like I said, things I should know by now. Appreciate the reminder on the protocol.
Yeah, we try to make sure any requests by board members do flow through the Finance Committee for use of the discretionary funds. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, and welcome, Coordinator Lang.
.10. So I'm having some difficulty logging on to the site here.
just, what are you trying to share?
This PowerPoint right here.
The PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Do you want to just email it to me quick?
Sure.
Is he not
It won't,
able tonight?
it won't let him just share his screen with the browser 'cause the connection's alive.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm trying here.
No, if you send your presentation to Greg, he can
I told you to send it to me.
Oh, either way.
Yeah.
It's not even. Here we go.
Did you, Deputy Jones, did you want to go to the head counts?
We can, if you want us to go,
I don't-
Dale and Sam are here, and then.
I don't
we can
want-
give them to- Yeah. no,
I don't
we're
want
ready.
coordinator to feel,
Yeah,
I don't want him to
okay.
feel pressure on
Yeah,
him.
sure. So, Madam Chair, if you'll
Yeah, I
allow
will.
us to come forward.
Please.
Okay.
And Coordinator Lang, I feel your pain. These computers do not like me either, so.
Madam Chair, may I proceed?
Please.
So as Dell's pulling up the presentation, this is an information item. The documents that you're about to see had to be created within the last 2 or 3 days. We just didn't have the information that we have now to inform you of the impacts. As you recall, the superintendent gave a really great brief about what trends we're seeing in enrollment. We really feel this is an important information item to you as we move together towards the EAC Executive Appropriations Committee meeting in December of the legislature, where we expect they'll set the public education-based budget. But this presentation will more duly inform you of what we can, or what the results were and what we can expect for the mid-year updates to the LEAs. With that, Madam Chair, if we could turn over to Director Uri and
Please.
Coordinator Frost.
All right. Thank you, Chair, Board, Dale Frost, Minimum School Program Administrator. So there are two presentations. I'll try to keep them both brief and answer your questions. The first looks at the enrollment changes, and the second talks about the impacts of those enrollment changes. All right. So this first table you have here, this compares October 1 counts by, so you'll see at the first line, there were 593,000 K-12 enrollments in districts last year in 2023. And then you'll see what our projections were for this year. We were projecting them to be down about 3,369, about a little more than 0.5%. Where did the district counts end up? Almost 7,000 down. They were down quite a bit. On the charter side, we predicted a drop of about 500 students, and they actually increased by 2,032 students. So overall, we saw a year-over-year drop in October 1 counts of just under 5,000 students, which is 0.74%. Questions about the overall figures. I'm going to kind of break that down and show you some trends. So to orient you, the Common Data Committee is made up of these four staff from these four organizations, LFA, GOPB, the Tax Commission, and USBE, to come up with joint consensus estimates on student counts, property tax valuations, and then that feeds into the base budget, the number of WPUs that form the basis of the education budget for the next year. Okay. So I wanted to show you kind of a 15-year picture of how October 1 counts have looked, K-12 counts. So you'll see on the left-hand side on that axis, that's the year-over-year change for the system. The green bars represent the total number of students. And you'll see back in fiscal 2010, we had about 550,000 students, and the system was growing about 2% every year. And then you can see a pretty, steady trend with that declining. You see right here from 2020 to 2022, quite a bit of disruption. Those were the COVID years when a fair amount of students opted out of the system, then opted back into the system. But by fiscal 23, we were pretty much back on trend. And we have been seeing declines in the overall student population for 2 years now. And we project over 1% down next year. That was the Common Data Committee. If you look at just school districts, it follows a similar trend that way. But yeah, we project school districts to actually be down more like 1.5% year over year next year. Now, this is the charter school sector for the last 10 years, and the percentage growth has changed quite a bit over the last 15 years. They were a much smaller part of the sector back 15 years ago at just over 30,000 students. They're now just over 80,000 students. They saw a decline in enrollments the year before COVID. The actual COVID year, which was fiscal 21, they saw an increase that was mostly to online charters, and then that reversed. So this kind of COVID disruption, if you look at that and compare that to the district side, it's actually the reverse of those years. But they've kind of settled down. We're still projecting about 1% to 2% growth. This was the highest percentage of charter school enrollments as part of the system this last year. We're watching that closely.
So what percent of the overall student population are charter students now?
It's just over 12%.
Okay, thanks.
So we break this down in the board backups for you by LEA, looking at the October 1 counts, the change from 22 to 23, and then 24, and then where we project them to be. So I'd recommend you look that up for your districts and the charters in your area. This is very similar to it's just looking at all grades, similar to the graphic that the superintendent showed. The yellow line shows the percentage of each grade of the total student population, and then the blue line, or the blue bars, are the number of students. So if you can see that the kindergarten class represents, 6.7% of the total population. You compare that to grade 11, where we're more like 8.3%. So yeah, this is just indicative of when your last grades are the largest classes, it's a declining population. And I echo what the superintendent said, that it's mostly driven by lower birth rates.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Member Klein.
Are the numbers of students that have left to use the Utah Fit Scholarship in these incorporated into the numbers that you're presenting? Are they included as part of the system, like with the charter schools, or are they out of the equation?
Madam Chair, to answer Board Member Klein's question, Board Member Klein, this is Deputy Superintendent Jones. The answer is no. the law requires that UFA fits all scholarship students cannot be included or enrolled in districts or charter schools and count towards the WPU. Madam Chair, does that answer Board Member Klein's question?
Board Member Klein?
So no, they are not included in the decline, or they're included in the numbers that are still in the schools.
So they are not included as members for membership in LEAs, in districts or charter schools. So they would have counted towards the enrollment decline that we're seeing here. But does that
Okay.
answer her question, Matt?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I read in the Salt Lake Tribune, I need to pull it up, but there was a statement at the end of the Tribune article that said that they were not included in those numbers.
Yeah, and I just said, Madam Chair, I do believe I did say that. They are not included in the numbers that you are seeing on this chart right now.
Meaning they weren't, well, the Trib said it in such a way as to mean that they were not part of the decline.
Well, they are a portion of the decline in the membership that is used to determine the funding for charter schools and districts. Does that help?
I'll find what it says and I'll
Yeah.
pipe in a minute.
Actually,
So-
Madam Chair, I am familiar with what Board Member Klein says. So I'm not criticizing the Salt Lake Tribune, but I do understand why that particular line could cause confusion. And I am not trying to cause confusion. I am trying to clarify that the students that are enrolled in the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program were removed from the counts for these, and so then it means that they were a part of the decline in enrollment.
Would it be fair to say that they were removed, so they are not reflected here? So
Correct.
the actual numbers, I mean, the number is lower. However, the reason that we are seeing declines has to do with birth rate, not necessarily Utah Fits All.
The most significant reason we are seeing declines is because of the birth rates.
Thank you.
The Utah Fits All is another reason for
Very
the
good.
declines in enrollment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
And Chair, if I may add, if in our discussion, if you look at certain LEAs and certain populations, it certainly is a factor. Certain online enrollments were more heavily impacted, and they are likely to be that, but we don't have the counts for those students but it is certainly a factor in the decline, in addition to birth rates and those other factors.
Chair, if I may, we do get a report from ACE, who is the contractor for the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program, contracted by you, through you. So we are in the process of reconciling any anomalies where a student is, UFA is saying the student is, or I'm sorry, ACE is saying the student is enrolled in the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program, and they also are showing enrollment in that. So then we would make sure that we are very clear, because the law is explicit that we cannot count a student that has been awarded the grant for the Utah Fits All Scholarship towards the WPU or within this thing. So we are doing our due diligence, working closely and very well with ACE to ensure we don't have duplicate enrollment, and this is an accurate thing from that vantage point. So
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
did
ma'am.
have
You
a-
did find it.
Oh,
Okay.
go ahead.
So it's 2 lines, it says from the Tribune, none of the students tallied in this data are voucher recipients. The state's new voucher program only applies to students attending private school as well as students who are homeschooled.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Very good.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Member Norton?
We have seen some different dissections of student populations. I'm just including, by grade and by district. I'm looking at that 2% rate there. Are there other sectors of the population that are kind of outliers of the Utah student population that might be outliers that urban, rural, or things like that? And I know we saw the breakdown of individuals, but that would be outliers of that 2%, or is it just kind of every group across the state's down about 2%?
Chair, may I clarify? Board Member Norton, the 2% that you mentioned, where's that coming from?
I'm sorry, I just did a quick kind of behind my head look for the 8% to 6%, but I could be totally
the
off.
difference,
Yeah, whatever.
The difference
yeah.
between
Yeah.
those. I wouldn't be able to tell you, urban versus rural. I'd have to look more into that to see what the trends, if the disparities are bigger, by location or other ways to slice the data. So I wouldn't be able to say at this time. Chair, if I may. There's only a few more slides on this front, and then we'll get to the dollars. So this just breaks it out by sector, district versus charter. The district side very much follows the trend that you saw overall. But interestingly, the charter sector doesn't follow that trend where, their second largest class is their kindergarten class. And I don't have a good answer as to why. I know we've known for a while that high school grades are smaller overall, but just wanted you to see kind of the breakdown by sector, by grade. So quickly going into some of the other counts, full day kindergarten, we're watching that closely. The CDC did not project growth. We decided not that we didn't think there was going to be growth in full day K, but rather than coming up with a methodology to project growth, they put a contingency fund in there. And what we found was that we added almost 6,000 students to FDK counts. And the difference from the sector went from 77 to 90%. Charters, it's 84, districts, it's 92%. So significant growth in full day K. And so you'll see that reflected in the numbers on the cost side. And the last one I think here is, even though we're seeing declines across students, teacher counts haven't been declining, even on the district side. So it's possible that this is contributing a little bit to slightly lower class sizes, but we'd have to look into that. Just wanted you to see that we're still growing the teacher population overall. And these are the group of teachers that qualify for the educator salary adjustment, which is the vast majority of educators.
Question? That's a really interesting point as we talk about class size reduction. That was, been a discussion in interim, PEA, et cetera. Are we tracking that then? Is that something as this enrollment decline comes into effect that we're kind of watching? You raised it as a potential issue, but are we on that? Are we going to be hearing whether it ticks that class size proportion down at all?
Chair, if I may answer. We do have a report that looks every year at the class size, by LEA for the state, by grade. I'd have to go into the data to look and see the trends, to see, if they have been declining. Clearly, I do know from the data that the smallest class sizes are the early grades, but I don't know if those have been changing over time. We'd have to look into that.
And I assume, it sounds like we have maybe a decade of this, and so it'd just be interesting to make sure we're following that, because that definitely informs that class size discussion. It's the first time we've had this natural decline in enrollment with maintenance of teachers, and be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Question.
Go ahead. Member Klein?
At what point do we stop trying to grow the teacher population if we're on a continual decline? of students?
Well, Chair, if I may answer, in this is the result of local decision-making, and it is not, driven by very many policies at the state level. And so that would be LEA by LEA. Certainly, there have been declines in certain LEAs, but overall, the system, and you can see that, the charter sector added the largest percentage between districts and charters, but they were growing as a sector versus districts. But yeah, that is a local decision as of this point.
I would add, I don't think that we're trying necessarily to grow as much as trying to meet the needs that have been unfilled in a lot of ways. Member Booth.
I was just wondering, how are we combining this important data with some of the other entities across the state that are looking at economic development, housing? For example, in Nebo District, I live in Spanish Fork, and I'm just seeing announcements, for example, in Salem, that there are going to be 10,000 homes that are approved that are being built in the fields west of Salem and Spanish Fork between the freeway and the community. And they're primarily starter homes. So that's going to be, of course, the district is looking at, they've already bought some land to put in a new elementary school, at least on the Spanish Fork end, and undoubtedly they'll have to do the same thing up a little bit further south, or down a little further south in Salem, to meet the needs of 10,000 homes that are currently on the books, and 500 are starting now, and a few more thousand, they're just coming along. So although we're seeing this as inflation levels out, as the economy hopefully gets better, how is that, are we projecting what we might anticipate in terms of growth and how that might impact these? Because of course we can look at the details of here and say, okay, well, we don't need to worry much in the next 10 years about building new facilities, but we probably do in some areas.
Yeah, Madam Chair. To answer Board Member Booth's question, so Dale mentioned the Common Data Committee. We have economists on the Common Data Committee. We work closely with the Ken Gardner Institute. So these what exactly or precisely Board Member Booth described is taken into account by input from these other groups, Ken Gardner Institute, economists from GOPB, economists from the LFA, so that when we estimate growth and fund growth, right, as Dale articulated, now we're estimating based on input and knowledge of what's going on in communities like Salem. We still are estimating that there will be a decline in enrollment, even though these houses are going up and all that. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be an increase in enrollment at some point for Nebo, so then we would catch that next year. But we look at the statewide total. But to answer his question more succinctly, those types of circumstances or considerations are always made as part of the process. Does that help answer Board Member Booth's question, Madam Chair?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, if I just may add that we're showing statewide numbers, but when we go through the CDC process, we do it by county and we do it then by district. And each charter projection is individual. And so we do have a lot of variation between the districts in growth. Some are declining by quite a bit, some are growing. And, more than even the USBE staff, LFA and GOPB have economists that are keyed in on those, looking at new housing starts, looking at those kind of things, because that's really important for where the population, it's not only what's the size of the population overall, but where will those students be.
Great, thank you.
So that concludes the first presentation on enrollment changes.
Hold on, Member Carey and then Member Klein.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hart. Just a quick question. I was reading an article in the Chronicles of Higher Education, and in there, and this goes to Board Member Booth's point, it said that over the next 10 years, the projection is that they will add 73,000 students in Utah and Wasatch counties. And so even though we're predicting a decline overall as a state, that in no way implies that certain counties are still going to continue to grow and grow robustly. Do we have that breakdown of those projections? I don't know who compiled those particular projections, but do we internally as USBE have those projections of county by county expected K through 12 enrollment over the next 10 years? Because again, this just said Utah County and Wasatch. It didn't go into district, but do we have that data? Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may answer. I don't know if we have long-term projections. I know the Gardner Policy Institute does. We do break that down when we're doing our enrollment projections. And so we're looking at differential birth rates, the K-12 differential by county. So we can certainly provide that data, and then we can get, I'm pretty confident that we can get the county by county projections. They do student overall population by, they'd be able to provide that. We can share that.
No, do not provide me with the birthing data. I wouldn't know what to do with it.
No,
So,
the student data.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll take that. Thank you.
Member Klein?
Yes, so I know that when a family leaves the system to homeschool, they have to notify the district and fill out an affidavit. Do we know what those numbers are for this last year or the last several years? That breakdown of how many have left to homeschool and what the growth of homeschooling is? Those that don't take a Utah Fit scholarship.
Go ahead.
Aaron Bruff, Director of Data and Statistics. Yes, we do have those numbers. We've been watching the trend year over year of how many students are exiting to a homeschool setting or to a private school setting. And yes, I don't have the graph in front of me with the exact numbers, but the trend, obviously, when I say obviously, it is up. This year, we've had I want to say it's about a 4 to 5% increase that we saw this year. It was about 9,000 total students who exited. In comparison, during the pandemic year where we had a lot of students exiting, it was about a similar rate of about 9,000 that happened that year. It dipped back down and now it's starting to increase again. So I do have that graphed out. I just don't have it with me at the moment with those numbers. So yes, we're looking at the trend has been for the last 3 years been increasing on those numbers. Once they exit the system though, we don't track them. We don't know where they are. And we only know those who were currently enrolled who then exited out of the system. So it's just kind of watching that trend line from time to time.
Right, so you don't know those that never entered the system because they chose to homeschool instead.
Correct.
The numbers that you cited, are those private school and homeschool combined, or do you have a breakdown of between the two?
We can break it down by both. So we have the overall exit and then both those to private and those to homeschool.
Okay, and you can send those to us, those graphs?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Klein.
I have just one.
Vice
Member
Chair Earl, and
Yeah.
then Member Lear.
Yeah, just one, and I mean, you can tell who left, right, this year. But the interesting thing is just getting an affidavit does not mean that the child's still homeschooling or even of homeschool age, because I get we haven't done that in years, every year. So there's some inaccuracies in the system because they don't know when to stop, right? So it's just interesting.
But as far as those turned in, we know what the numbers of
Well,
affidavits turned in,
those
right?
that left this year, right? It's if you left this year, we have those numbers. But the full amount that are homeschooling, there's no way of, no.
Right.
No.
You just have
Just
to do it
the
once.
number.
But
Yep.
I actually raised my hand.
Go ahead, Member Lear.
But and my point was kind of the same, that there's no consequences for not turning in an affidavit, right?
Yes-ish.
Well-
Is it, so when you say there's no consequences for sending in the affidavit?
For not turning in the
Yeah,
affidavit.
you can still exit, and what the requirement is the LEA makes, again, based upon their policies, their best effort to determine what happened to the student. If they get nothing, they mark, we don't have anything, and so there's, like you said, there's no consequences.
So I've thought for a long time that we don't have a very accurate number of the students, because we don't really know if the LEA may know if the student went to a private school, because sometimes the school requests a transcript.
Correct.
If they go to homeschooling and we don't really know. I worry about relying too much on those data, because we don't really, there's no consequences, I would say, for,
If I can
and if
reply.
I'm wrong, I'd love to know that.
So, to give you example, the higher grades, so the cohort from 9th grade through 12th grade, we have to track every single student, and what happens to them. And exiting to a homeschool or private school or out of the state removes them from the cohort calculation and has higher scrutiny for using the exit codes. And so we do checks with the LEA saying, when you're using these codes, you have to verify that they actually did exit correctly, meaning you can't just say, well, I don't know where the kid went, I'm just going to use a code. You have to verify, well, I'm using this code, it exits them from the calculation, hence there needs to be stored documentation. It's a state and federal requirement. You can't just use them with no
Right, but
documentation.
if the LEA doesn't put anything in that box,
If they don't put anything in the box
Then
for
what
the higher
happens?
grades, then they get counted as a dropout.
so there is a little bit of a consequence.
And so let me say ish. There's
Yeah.
that, and so as we do the
That's a good
the
point.
dropout rates, which is the grade level,
Right.
and then also for the graduation cohort dropout rate, there are some consequences there. So the
They have an
LEAs do a
incentive.
really good job of verifying the data, and plus, when a student transfers to another district,
That's
our
easy.
system picks it up.
Yeah.
Oh, they're over
Yeah.
here.
That's
So,
easy. I'm
yeah.
just more thinking about the ones who don't. I didn't realize that would count, that there's an incentive then for the LEA to say this kid went into homeschooling or into private school, because otherwise in the higher grades he'd be.
The higher grades, but also in
affects
that
your
event
dropout
dropout rate. So we do watch those and track those, and we have to report on them.
Ah,
So
that's-
there is an incentive. It's not
That's
like
good
a
info.
funding or,
Right.
thing like that, but there is
Reputation.
reputation. And there was an audit from the, one of the federal bureaus, and I can't remember at the moment, looking at the cohort, that we had to basically increase our monitoring of those codes being used to exit to homeschool and private school.
That's really good information. Thank you. That gives me a little more confidence in the information we have.
Thank you, and let's move on.
Yes. Sam Uri, School Finance Director. Dale Frost is going to give the majority of this presentation, but I just want the board to know how much Dale has done just to get you these numbers so that we can discuss really important issues about the ending balances. Apart from building the billions of dollars of base budget that we have going into next session, he's now taken what Aaron Bruff's team of data and statistics has done a fantastic job of compiling, what we call the LEA extracts, all of that data, and he's now, within a matter of days, gone and adjusted the funding estimates for every LEA. He's done it accurately, he's done it timely, and he's now going to communicate it to you in a way that, we can allow the board to make decisions. So I just really want the board to know how much Dale Frost and Brett Baker of the MSP team, there's two of them. And the MSP this year, Dale, is 6.7 billion. There's two of them. So I just want the board to know how important the work that they do is and how well that they do their work. And so take it away, Dale.
You're
Can
gonna
I,
make me
can I
blush.
say something before he starts? And you as well, Sam, because I hope I'm not breaking a health violation, but I know you've been under the weather big time. And I know you're doing a lot of work too, even when you haven't been feeling well, you've been doing it, so thank you.
One of these days I'll get my tonsils out, but for now I get strep throat a couple times a year.
So, Chair, if I may dive in, I just want to say this is the first year that we're able to present these data at this time because the legislature required LEAs to report slightly earlier, and we stuck with Deputy Superintendent Jones did a great job of managing expectations, so we got the data in quickly, and we were able to turn these around. I do want to say that we're still doing quality checks before these get loaded into LEA budgets. So these numbers may change slightly, but the story, we want to give you an idea of what the impacts of those student changes that we're talking about are. Very briefly, the minimum school program, again, is $6 to $7 billion, depending how you count it. It's the largest part of the state budget. It's the largest part of USBE's budget. And we go through this process after session. We create LEA distributions that are called the legislative estimates. Those are based on the projections that the CDC does. And then we true up to actual data. That's what we're doing right now with the mid-year updates. So this is a calendar where you can see that the green boxes are kind of the major pieces of the calendar for fiscal 25. So last November is when we created the property tax collections and the projections for this October 1. After the session, we came out with the legislative estimates. That's the backbone to which LEAs, that's what they base their budgets on. And then we're truing that up to actual enrollments, actual ADM counts, actual cactus counts. And so we have a much clearer picture of the fiscal impacts. The one thing that's left outstanding, you can see all the way, period 11, so 11 months into the current year is when we finally get property tax collections. And that factors in, this is an important part of this conversation that you'll see, that the unknown right now on what our ending balance will be really depends on how property taxes come in. All right, so bottom line up front, we project that the MSP ending balance, these are all of the biggest programs in the education budget. If things come in pretty well, we're looking at an $8 million deficit. If not, then we're looking at a $41 million deficit. And these are costs that have to be covered before, any kind of new discussion of new funding. So this is how that breaks out. This only shows the certain dollar amounts right now. So you can see here, the top table here, BSP stands for the Basic School Program. These are the WPU-based programs. And these are only the ones that are driven by student counts where the actual total cost will change. Class size reduction, for example, the allocations between districts will change, but the total cost doesn't. So you don't see class size reduction there. But kindergarten, if we have more full day K students, there's a greater cost. And we talked about the increase of full day K. That's that $13 million that you see there at the right on the top. So we need to cover those costs. Grades 1 through 12. Grades 1 through 12. You may have the question, why is it that our student counts are down and yet it's costing us more money? And that is because of what's called the prior year plus growth, or the hold harmless provision. If you remember, districts declined, charters increased. Basically, districts are held harmless for a year, but we pay for the growth on the charter side. That's what's causing that $9.5 million. And then pro staff is driven by the WPUs in K-12. So that's about $26 million. So just to kind of break it down, this might be too small for you. I apologize. FDK counts now this is not comparing year-over-year actuals, this is comparing to our projections, on which the legislative estimates were based. Kindergarten counts overall were down from projections about 2,000, but FDK counts were up about 4,500. We already talked about that district counts were down about 1,100, but charter counts were up about 2,300. So that's really what's driving that. So SPED add-on, we came in under projections the first time in a few years that the special education population, even though it's growing, it's not growing like it was. My theory is that that formula change from House Bill 113 from a few years ago, that's starting to play out. Now it's more just natural growth of the population. But so that's going to provide a savings to the state of $5.4 million. And then at-risk add-on, these are the students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch or English language learners. The students experiencing economic disadvantage, those counts are down a little bit. So this shows you, so economically disadvantaged, fiscal 24 SPED counts are down 963 from projections, and then economically disadvantaged counts are down 8,200, quite a bit. And I don't have answers to the why of all these changes, but that's what we're seeing in the data.
Dale, a couple questions?
Yeah.
I see a light from Member Davis, and I had a question, if that's okay. Is this a good
Sure.
place to
Yeah.
pause? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. On the special ed counts, we changed that, well, the legislature changed a while back. We asked them to, from, I think, like the 11% to the 14%. Is the growth in special ed being impacted because some of the LEAs are starting to hit that 14%? What's happening there?
Chairman?
Because they can't count on, if they have
Right.
17%, they can't count it. They can only count up to 14%, right?
Chair, if I may answer. You are correct. The prevalence counts, depending on the size of the county, it's either 14% or 20 for the smallest counties. Very few, I think 1 or 2 districts are at that level.
14?
So, yeah, either
Or
14
20.
or 20. And what the growth is because of how the formula changed, they're just capturing more of the growth than we saw. And that's just because it became more current. Beforehand, you had to wait a few years before you even saw that growth.
Because there is a 5-year lag, and now there's a 2-year lag.
So
something.
there was a foundation piece. It gets complicated, but basically on the growth side, it was a 3-year lag, and now it's a 2-year lag. And then on the foundation side, it used to be 5 years prior, now it's 4 years prior. So they made those changes. So we saw some increase in the WPUs it's basically we're capturing more of the growth from the formula, but it's just generating more WPUs than was before.
So it's not all of a sudden we have less need in special ed. It's that we saw a lot of growth with the readjustments, with the new formulas, and now that's leveled off.
Correct. That's what I would say. I would say that for a few years we saw the adjustment to a new level, and
Okay.
now it's just the natural growth of the population.
Thank you.
My question might have been the same. Was that what you meant by the changes from 113? Was it the formula that
Correct.
Member Davis
That's
was
what we're
asking
talking
Same,
about.
same thing, right? Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Member Bogus, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. I believe I have a series of questions for Mr. Frost. So did I hear you correctly that with the hold harmless codes, we're holding harmless the traditional LEA, and we're also providing a WPU for the charter school?
Chair, if I may. So it's not, yes, is the answer to that question, but it's not just charters versus district. A district growing would also receive their growth funding. So the way it works, let's say there's 1,000 students in an LEA.
Mm-hmm.
If last year they were at 950, let's say they were at 1,000 last year and now they're at 950. They're not showing positive growth. They get funded for the 1,000. If they were now this year 1050, they get funded for the 1050. And so it's kind of a 1-year reprieve. The logic being that once you're in the middle of the year, your budgets are set, And it's very difficult to right-size organizations. You don't want to immediately let go of teachers and those sort of things. So that's why in these two, and it's not all formulas, it's just the two biggest, kindergarten, grades 1 through 12, where there's that mechanism of you get the higher of either last year's ADM or this year's October 1 counts.
And if I may,
Okay.
that's true for districts or charters.
Or charters. So is it fair to say that the taxpayers are paying for a single student twice over?
For a small portion of the students, yes,
Okay, so then
for 1 year.
I have two formal follow-up questions. Is that okay?
Yeah,
So-
I wanted to piggyback on that one. Are yours related to this one? or
They're
can I
they're
slip
related
in?
to this too.
I'll
They're-
slip in after yours then.
Okay,
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
with the Utah Fits All, it says that that if a student is receiving a scholarship, they can't use that also in another, I forget the language, but if a district's being held harmless, can they actually charge students under the FITS program and double dip in that capacity?
Chair, may I answer the question?
I hope,
Um,
sorry, sir, I hope I articulated that well.
So in the case, let's say, everything being equal, you have one student that, that goes to Utah Fits All, and so now you're showing a decline of one student. And then, so that per pupil funding would go to the district for that 1 year period, and then that student would receive the $8,000. There's no charging from the district to the student, but because of the way that the formula works, that student is generating additional cost during that transition period, that 1 year transition period. So does that help, or does that add more confusion?
Well, actually, I think I need to reframe my question. May I, sir?
Sure.
Okay, so the Fits All program has a caveat, if you will, that, for example, a student wants to take, let's say, a Spanish class. Then the district can bill the Fits All program a monetary amount. But my understanding is that they can't double dip. So if there's a hold harmless, how can they be held harmless for the same student that they're billing out the Spanish class for? Did I articulate that in a way that registers? Okay.
One of the challenges, I mean, this year, because it's a brand-new program, those students are in that one, that place. It's a little hard to know, because let's say you had 50 kids come in and you had 40 kids leave, the net is an increase of 10 kids. And so, the funding is based on, what was your ADM last year versus this year. And so, can the district charge the student for that Spanish class? It's really difficult to say these dollars are related to that student in this case, and especially in year 2, that's not the case, where it's just, they're no longer included in the accounts. And so, I
And if
don't know.
if I may, so you
I
have to
just
have a
have one.
couple of variables here be in effect for this to even be a scenario. The district would have had to lose enrollment overall, and again, to Dell's point, it's hard to assign that to the specific individual student because there's so many fluctuations in population. Additionally, the LEA would have to be one of those Utah Fits All providers, and not all LEAs are. So in the case that the district did lose enrollment and is a Utah Fits All provider, I suppose you could make an argument that they're double dipping, but the hold harmless provision is to keep the district whole so that they can right size their operations as necessary, and it really is not tied to any specific one student.
Okay, I have just one final follow-up, if that's okay. So, as I'm listening to this, and I just want you to tell me if I'm correct, because I hope I can frame it in the form of a question, but it seems to me, as the policy is written, that this program with our hold harmless codes is actually costing the taxpayer about 3 times the WPU per student that enters the Fits All program, because the stipend itself is tied to the WPU and tied to the inflationary index. And if we have a hold harmless code tied to that student, I understand that there's variables, you've articulated that, but it's a lot more than just 2 times the WPU going to this fits-all program. That would that be accurate? 1.4, 1.5 times the fits-all program is actually the taxpayer cost to fund this and hold our districts harmless?
In some scenarios, yes, but again, it's really difficult to narrow that down to the one individual Utah fits all student. I think it would require further study to give you. Yeah. No, these are. These are.
I think we owe that. Could we please study it? Maybe I may need to make a motion, but I think that our taxpayers need to have a very clear understanding of the cost of this program that has been purported and marketed as a cost savings, when in actuality it is a breach of trust with the public, with our hold harmless codes, for our public policymakers to assert that this is better for the taxpayer, when in actuality it's costing the taxpayer more per child, whether it be a little bit more or 200% more. We need to articulate that. And so I'm asking a question, hopefully, and I apologize for doing one more.
So if you would want a study, then it would be written up and put through with, we would use the federal mineral lease that's used for research. So we could, I can talk to you offline about how to get that proposal in. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how big it is.
Chair, may I
Yeah.
answer? And it depends on what Board Member Bogus means by a study. But if it's really, once we get the Utah Fits All data, and especially if we can find from which district they're, or which LEA they're coming from, we might have to make some assumptions, but we can calculate what that relative cost is. That's not, outside the realm of our normal duties. And then we can estimate this is what the per student cost in year 1 would be versus year 2. And is that kind of what you're referring to, Board Member Bogus?
Yes, sir, it is. And if I need a motion for the will of the board or without objection, can we ask them to do that, or does that need to be formalized?
I mean, there's
go
a
ahead.
couple of options. You can make a request for data information in finance, AEG views. Did you have?
Information item, not an action item, so publicly,
Yeah.
we haven't noticed to the public that you would be taking.
So an opportunity for action would be, in committee, where you can request data information or propose a, yeah, there we go. All right. Couple of options out there.
Good deal.
Chair,
Thank you,
if
AH abuse.
If I may add some important context here, we have identified that a couple of districts, about $5 million of this hold harmless cost can be attributed to students who were online students in similar programs, as if you recall last year with Tooele School District that lost a large number of students who were online through educational service providers. We have identified that about $5 million of the hold harmless costs this year are due to some of those students in other districts, and there have been some discussions with the legislative fiscal analysts and others to look at that potentially in the legislative session, potentially make some changes. We don't know how many of those students specifically went to Utah Fits All at this time, but there could be costs to the hold harmless that the legislature may want to address in the session as this goes forward. So it is a topic of discussion and through the legislative process.
The conversations we're having with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office, they're going to have with legislators to try to surface that in what cases is this prior year plus growth appropriate versus others, and there's very likely to be those conversations. I do want to bring the caveat that we're still finding the data to really get to what is right on those cost items, but that's still ongoing. So.
Okay, great. Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question, and I hope this isn't tangential, but I thought that the UFA could also be used for public school students to pay for extracurricular fees and such. And would that adjust any of this? Am I understanding that right, or can they not use it?
So the district can charge them for like a class, they can be an approved provider under the FITSAL program.
But can a public school student who's attending full-time during the day use the UFA to pay for
No,
the
they
soccer
can't-
fees?
They can't do both.
Got it.
Outside and come in, but you
They could come in for 3 classes.
Right. If you are
But that's weird, because
an
they could come in
LEA
for 3
student,
classes anyway.
you cannot take Utah Fits All. But if you take Utah Fits All, you can, if the district
For a
is
charge that you pay.
What's that?
For a charge you pay out of your UFA money, you have
That
to
is
pay it
correct.
to the LEA.
If the LEA is in the marketplace, yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Chair,
let's-
may I
yes.
wrap up?
Oh,
or-
I'm sorry.
or-
I keep
go ahead.
forgetting. Can I get Member Lear's question in and then, go
I'm
ahead.
not taking it personally yet.
I know. Thank you.
I had a similar question to Cindy's. Is your system, I'm trying to think of the word, technically able to identify, like, if it has a student who's gets a Utah Fits All scholarship, gets the voucher, then can your system find that student if he tries to enroll in public school classes?
Aaron Bruff, Data and Statistics, and the answer is yes. So we are doing audits and checks on that. If you enter into Utah Fits All and then we see the enrollment, then it would cancel out and Utah Fits All scholarship would basically say you're enrolling in a
And
regular
so
school.
what
And so
happens if it happens in the
They-
middle of a term?
I don't know the exact steps, but I know Utah Fits All or ACE then would go and recoup the funds because they're enrolling full-time. That's my understanding. It's complicated, but the systems will catch if they overlap.
But Utah
Uh,
Fits All doesn't really have any incentive to,
That's beyond what I know.
okay.
Yeah, I think we're getting away from
Thanks, I knew you'd say that, so I just tried to get that question
But
really quickly.
I do think that there are many questions in this space, and we will try to get as many of them with a conclusive answer as possible. But if you could, okay, if we could move on, that'd be great.
I only have a few more slides. I'll wrap up pretty quickly. So this shows that last line filled
Hold on,
in. Oh, excuse me.
hold on. Can, board members, can we get your attention, please? We can't hear. Thank you.
So the last program of note is the voted and board local levy programs. These are the property tax guarantee programs meant to try to equalize funding for disparities or differences in property tax wealth across the districts. Again, going back to that point that the last big data point that we get in the year are property tax collections. And so that's why there's quite a range between an additional 11 million to 22.5 million in savings for that program. And that's what's driving that difference in what our balance is. And I can go into more detail on why that is. What we've done is over the summer, we've done some analysis looking at, so CDC, the fall before, projects property tax values for this year 490.8 is the projected tax value that the CDC had. The tax commission for the certified tax rate process came in at 515 billion. That was set this last summer. So it's whether you use which one is the difference in that range. We don't know where it will come in at the end of the day. But I did some analysis over if we had used the certified tax rate process over the last 5 years. It does predict where we ended, whether we ended with the balance in the program or not. I can get into more of those specifics if you want me to, but what it really comes down to is this $289 million is the amount appropriated into the program. I think there will be a savings. Will it be $20 million? It's really hard to know at this point. And so that is the unknown. But the legislature, since we don't have as much balance as we've had in the past, the legislature may want to do a supplemental appropriation to make sure that there's adequate funding to cover everything. We do have balances to cover that. The question is, where will property taxes come in? And the amount of buffer to put in there is really a policymaker decision, at the end of the day. But we just want to be transparent with you all about where we see the numbers, and that's where we stand.
Question from Chair Moss.
So in the equalization that comes out of the voted board, is that amount that's going to the rest of the state already set, or does that depend on, in other words, I kind of understood this to be revenue neutral, whatever the receipts are, you reallocate over here. Was that part of what you were just saying, or did I jump to a different topic?
So the way, at a very high level, the legislature appropriates a certain amount of money, and then during the legislative estimates process, we calculate how much per WPU that can guarantee. So this year, it's about $64 per increment per WPU. And that's based on our CDC projections. At the end of the year, that same guarantee level is what stays constant. The cost could go up or down depending on how property taxes come in. Over here you can see down here at the bottom table, in 22 and 23, when property taxes were going through the roof, we as a state saw $38 million in lower costs to have the same guarantee rate in 22 and $62 million in 23. What we didn't see was in 24, we actually had $16 million in additional costs. And so that got the legislature's attention. We don't want to have it cost more than is appropriated. We are able to cover that in the balance. Statute allows us to, because of these uncertainties in the program. So it basically comes down to, there's a certain level that's set by the legislature. We're going to fund such amount that gets calculated to a rate, and then depending on the local state mix is what it costs at the end of the day.
Got it. It's not taking last year's receipts and reallocating. It's based on projections. The hope is revenue neutral, but that's a projected. Therefore, you might have plus or minus, as opposed to, hey, we got all this last year. Next year, we redistribute. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And that concludes our presentation. Happy to answer any other questions. Thank you for your time.
Looking for any other questions? I don't see any, and so Mr. Lang, you're up. Thank you, guys, gentlemen.
Thank you, Board. Max Lang, the Board's coordinator for Elementary Secondary Education Act federal programs. I just want to express my appreciation for the Board's patience as I publicly demonstrated my technological ineptitude. I believe I have thrown out a lifeline to my colleague to step up for me. Normally, our great colleague Sarah Harwood would be here to present these updates on the COVID relief funds. I'm happy to announce, whether she wanted me to or not, and she better not be watching, she is on maternity leave. I believe she had her first baby either on Halloween Day or slightly thereafter. So, on Halloween. A scary baby. So, thank you for the opportunity to present updates on the COVID relief funds. Because there were 3 acts that Congress distributed funds through the Department of Education to grants to states. The 2 first ones, CARES and the CRSA Act, and the programs that were funded by the Department of Education under those acts have since sunsetted. I'd like to recognize the board's attention to these particular funding resources because it was over $1 billion that were allocated to Utah in very short succession. What I am going to update on, and there are, I have to say, there are additional detail regarding the first 2 acts and the programs under those, ESSER 1, GEAR 1, EANS 1, ESSER 2, GEAR 2, in the appendix and the additional slides that are provided in the board's backup. I'm going to update on the remaining act that still has some motion, still has some action related to it, the American Rescue Plan. Slide 7, and as you can see, Sarah updated these slides. The reason it's listed as in progress, because of the almost $660 million, this is the only one that still has some action related to it, meaning there are still funds that LEAs are have flexibility to apply request for reimbursement on. The sunset date is a date that we had been talking about for 4 years. September 30th, 2024 was the final sunset date of the COVID Relief Act funding. This slide demonstrates of the ESSER 3 funds, the remaining ARP ESSER funds, the categorical allocations that were used by the state, the majority of which went directly to LEAs for safety related to the pandemic, learning loss mitigation, professional learning, and staffing. Slide 8. Sorry, next slide. Well, I'm glad it's not just me. There is something. Yeah, Kelsey's got it. It's frozen on her side. Yay. Okay, this slide, there are some noted pieces here. For the ESSER 3 requirements, or the way that LEAs use these funds, there is a federal requirement that 20% of those be utilized for accelerated learning. Now, the Department of Education alternately uses the term accelerated learning and mitigation for learning loss. The requirement was 20% of those funds be spent on services for the mitigation of learning loss. Utah LEAs actually spent above that, 36%. The rest of those funds were spent by LEAs for technology, capital improvements, and student and community health services. And then slide 9, cross your fingers. Thank you. This slide demonstrates how or where we stand as of October 28th in the request for reimbursement or the drawdown on these funds under ESSER 3. So we're almost there. There is a grace period for LEAs to request reimbursement. We still have until December 10th, but those numbers will show you where we stand currently with those funds. We're getting there. Slide 10. So just to be noted, there was a federal award under this act for emergency assistance for non-public schools, or EANS 2. Sarah put this in just to be noted that there was for these funds a slight difference between the way EANS 1 funds were allocated to LEAs and the way EANS 2 funds were allocated out for services. The difference is EANS 1 funds went out based on a similar formula as the ESSER funds. EANS 2, USBE is unallowed to reimburse directly for requests to the non-public LEAs. We manage actually those contracts and reimburse directly on those contracts. And then slide 11. This is just a simple breakdown of how, with the ESSER 3 funds, the ARP ESSER funds, Utah LEAs focused those funds towards services, the largest of which was for educational technology, down to activities associated with IDEA, Adult Ed, and CTE. Slide 12. And this is where the continuing action, aside from approving requests for reimbursement on the ARP ESSER funds, the Department of Education allowed for an opportunity for states to apply for late liquidation of the ARP ESSER funds and the EANS 2 funds. So this would allow for those approved LEAs with continuing expenses and up to an additional 14 months. The funds still needed to be obligated by the end of September 2024. This would allow for funds that had been previously obligated, but where LEAs were unable to expend those funds or request reimbursement on those funds for payments up to 14 months. The Governor's Office of Planning and Budget also approved for us to apply for late liquidation on EANS 2 funds. We received the approval from the Department of Education on September 24th for projects and related projects for continued and contracted professional development and student tutoring services for 8 private schools, non-public schools. We submitted our application for late liquidation on the ARP ESSER funds on October 21st. Those LEAs that were included in that late liquidation were Granite, Logan, and Salt Lake. For continued program services and facility updates and upgrades. We're still working with the Department of Education for final approval for that late liquidation. I spent most of the day on the phone with the Department of Education confirming and providing additional information on our request. So that is where we stand currently, the last of the COVID relief funds. We passed that September 30th, 2024 date. These are the remaining activities that we're still working through. And then lastly, if you have questions, and again, in the appendix to this presentation, in the board's backup, there is additional detail related to each of these COVID relief funds and their related programs.
Excellent.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Member Wood.
So on those final reimbursements that are due by December 10th, if they go past those, does that mean they just absorb the cost? The LEAs absorb the costs that they didn't
And Chair, if I may.
properly request?
Yeah, that falls in suit with every federal program. They have that sunset date, and then past that request for reimbursement date. If the LEAs do not request that, those funds are then waived.
Any other questions, board members? Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and I hope you don't have to spend a whole nother day on the phone with the feds. That is not a good use of time. That's my editorial. Thank you very much. All right.